G'day guys, how's it going? Now, I'm going to describe to you all of the skills in Gemcraft Labyrinth and maybe some, I don't know, tactics on how to use them most efficiently. Now, when you're playing the normal free version and you haven't got a premium account, in other words, if you haven't bought the game, then all of these skills down at the bottom row, they will not be available. Instead, you'll just have top two rows, and essentially something to note, which is very important, is that more or less, for the most part, you'll be putting the most of your skill points available into focus, because focus really does help you out at the very start of the game, just so much. It makes a massive difference. As for the rest, well, I'll go through and explain them all one by one. Now, what's focus? Focus gives you a high initial mana and mana pool size at the beginning of each battle. So basically, this is your mana pool up here, this blue bar up here at the top near the right. This is your initial mana. In my case, for this particular level, it's 14,817. For anyone starting the game for the first time on the first level, it'll be something like 400, 450, something like that, a very small number. And this is your maximum mana, and the bar shows roughly how far along you have gone up to your maximum. And you can extend it, 83,000 is the maximum. Again, now 110, 138. It'll be different depending on what level you've got your focus and so forth on, but that's just a quick explanation and a demonstration of what goes on. So this extends what you start with, and that is very important. Now, next we have, I'll go up, down, left to right. Next is replenish. More mana replenishes over time. Basically, the mana you gain mana. Sorry about that. What happens is you gain mana over time, but very, very slowly. Like, you might, at the very start of the game, you might gain a single mana every couple of seconds. But yeah, it's kind of strange. Honestly, I'm not that much of a fan of this particular one. It also gives more mana gain per kill. Now, that might sound very nice, but to be honest, when you let's just drag this all the way down. Actually, let's see. It's gonna take a while. Yeah, I know these numbers are pretty enormous. Just ignore them for the moment. I'm just trying to demonstrate to you that when you're starting off with this spell, let's see, it doesn't cost much. It costs very little mana, little in the way of skill points. Look, I've got it up to level 15, and it still only costs, what, it costs 2 skill points until you get to level 21. Yeah, level 21, the next level costs 3 skill points. It doesn't cost much to put your skill points into this, but look at the 23% more mana replenish over time and more mana gain per kill. Now, 23% more mana gain per kill is probably the one you're going to be interested in more. Now, I'm sorry, but what? Okay, even if it was 25%, now that's a quarter of the money you get more than initially. Now, per kill, it's totally negligible considering if you're playing against swarms and so forth. If you're playing against giant waves, then what would you get? Maybe on average on the early levels, early waves, maybe 80 to 100 mana per giant kill, so we're talking an extra 25 mana per kill. I'm not convinced that it is worth pouring so much of your skill points into this. I'm not convinced. I think there are better places you can go to spend your skill points. Moving on, Forge, 30% lower gem creating and combining mana costs. Now this does cost a lot of skill points as you go investing into it, but it is a good one. I recommend you definitely try and max out Forge. Relatively, maybe it's not as important as Focus. But it is probably one of the more important skills that I would recommend you put into, because it just really helps out creating gems, combining gems. It's any of those costs where you're constantly doing during the game, it'll all add up, and it it's a must. And again, with construction, sure, 40%. It doesn't take a lot of skill points to max out this one, but it's it's not that important, to be honest, unless you're going to be using, maybe building a lot of amplifiers or building a lot of walls and so forth. This just makes construction of all of the buildings that you can build cheaper. Let's see, both types of shrines, walls, traps, and towers. And I'm missing something. Oh, and amplifiers as well. Basically makes them cheaper to build. Um, Again, pour some skill points into it early, but really only a couple. It's a fairly low priority thing, low priority skill to be investing in early in the game. Maybe a little bit more mid game, you can probably spare a few points for it. Um, Moving on, we've got now mastery for the 8 different types of gems. You've got 4 over here and 4 over here. Uh, Essentially, it really does depend on what level you're playing as to whether or not you will want to invest in any of these. It is, unless you plan on unlocking a gem type during a battle, there is no point in investing in any of these where you don't have the gem at the start. So it can vary from level to level, and you'll be finding yourself, you know, taking a little bit off there and putting it all on there instead or whatnot, just to try get the right gems, the right amounts. And for this particular one, it's got poison and mana gain for G7. So, and there's a little yellow dot handily placed to let you know, yep, these are the gems that are going to be on this level. They will move around depending on what level you're on. And to be honest, early and mid game, there's no point. Honestly, no point at all in putting any of your skill points in any of these, except for the 2 that you start with, and maybe a third if you're constantly buying maybe Bloodbound. I'll discuss tactics with you about this sort of thing later, but just for example, maybe if you know you're going to buy Bloodbound, then by all means, pump your skill points into it. And it's actually quite important. Let's see, what does it do? It only works on the specific gem's special. I think it does nothing to do with the base damage that the gem does when firing, or the range, or the rate of fire. It's just the special, the special ability. So, yeah. And at the end of the day, it's not that high a priority. Maybe you can pump a couple in there. Just, it's fairly cheap skill points wise to maybe go up 5 or 6 levels, and then pump the rest of what you've got into focus or something in the early levels. That's probably one of the better things to do. But it doesn't hurt to pump a few skill points into them. I mean, the benefits you feel are pretty large. Look, we've spent what, 8, 9, maybe 10 skill points now. Got it up to level 7. 28% higher poison damage. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but in the game, it might be the difference between being able to kill all of those swarm waves that you've been bringing on, or losing. It could make the difference. So it's up to you. It varies from level to level. Um, yeah. And unless you've got everything maxed out, you will be juggling those on and off a lot. Now, moving away from those, flexibility. 20% decreased cost of extend mana pool spell. 20% decreased cost of unlocking gem types. If you don't know what those two are, I will explain right now. This is your extend mana pool spell. It basically makes it a little bit cheaper, not only initially, but 20% less of whatever it would be if you had no skill points invested in that skill. So initially, I think it's 240 for the first, and 300 and no, I think it's 300 even for the second one. So yeah, it's cheaper. It works out quite a fair bit cheaper. And as you can see, it's extending my mana pool. My initial mana just goes down, it doesn't go up, but it's extending the maximum. And also, extending it is really good. I will explain all of these in detail later, but let me just say this is definitely a good idea. You should get into the habit, even relatively early on in your journeys in this game, you should get into the habit of at least buying the extended mana pool or extending it just once. Just once. It will make a big difference, strangely enough, even though it says 1.05 times. It applies to also your mana gain per kill and so forth and stuff like that. It makes a decent sized difference. You'll notice it. Oh, I recommend that. And and also, sorry, it also, that skill that we were talking about, it makes these cheaper to unlock a little bit as well. There you go. That's all that does. Turn to the map. Moving on. Dual Gem Mastery. Gems having two base components gain 10% to their multiplier to damage, range, and firing speed. I'm guessing, yep, 1% per level, 10 levels. It's not very expensive, and I do recommend that every time you start a level, you should always start with a gem that has two components into it rather than a pure one component gem. Just simply because you do get those extra. Yeah, you do lose a little bit as far as the specials are concerned for the gem, but you will get a little bit more firing speed, a little bit more damage, and a little bit more range. And this just helps that out further. So I think a dual gem with the skill like that gets 5% extra for all of those. If you upgrade it completely like that, then your dual gems get 15% extra damage, and trust me, that's what you want at the start of the game. You want to be able to pump out units quickly and get more mana and so forth. I'll discuss those later in another video. Skipping ahead from those, next, Resonance. Higher damage for all gems. Now that's all damage, minimum and maximum. Okay. By all means, I think it. Yeah, it's. This can get expensive, especially as you pump a lot more skill points into it. But at the start, it's nice to just have a little bit of. Yeah, I'd say this is a relatively important skill, probably about as important as Forge actually. So yeah, pump in a little bit there, and that'll help you with the harder levels that have units that just start with much more hit points. You need something like this just to stay on par. So definitely keep this in mind. This is one of the most important skills in my mind. 40% higher firing speed for all gems. You must try and max out recharge. It is a very expensive thing to do, skill, as far as skill points are concerned, but I cannot stress enough, recharge is really important. It will make your gem so much more powerful. Definitely a must, right up there with Forge. Yeah, focus, sorry, not Forge, focus. Recharge is important. Now, Wild Gem, I need to talk about this one. Start each battle with a gem in your inventory, creates a grade 1. So, just one gem is a grade 1. And then put through random combining 2 times. Each field has its unique wild gem. Well, that is definitely true. Basically what happens is if you increase this all the way up to 20, it will just combine it with more gems. And you essentially, it depends on what you end up with. What it will do is it will just create a whole bunch of gems, it will combine them, You might end up, when it's at level 20, I know for a fact that you'll end up with either a grade 5 gem or a grade 6 gem at the start of every battle. So here you go, here's my wild gem. It's what? Green, yellow, and orange? Uh, green, orange, and I don't know where the yellow component came from. Uh, I don't know. But yeah, it's usually three components. It rarely is it two components. It'll only be two components usually if you've got only one skill point pumped into that. But you know what? To be honest, I think the only use that the wild gem has is to let you hover over it, press X, and sell it. And honestly, that's what I do. I always sell my wild gem straight at the start of every battle. I mean, there was an extra 10,000 mana basically for me. I can't say no to that. And that way I get rid of some crappy, useless gem that was randomly created and have the mana to make whatever I want. So that's what I recommend. I recommend if you... Whoops, I'm not restarting, I'm going back. Yeah, if you do, it's relatively important in that it kind of works like focus. It gives you more mana at the start, essentially. You get to sell it and get your mana back. So do that, I recommend it. Get the wild gem. It does cost a bucket load. 5 points at the start. It's nice to have at least a couple of points in there. You know, have it at 2 or 3 initially, because it does cost a lot of skill points. But hey, what can I say? Free mana at the start. It's very hard to say no to that. Moving on, we have Radiance. 20% higher range for all gems. It's, despite what it seems like, I mean, really, range, it's nice, but it's nowhere near as important as recharge. I would almost completely max out recharge before I even thought about putting more than maybe 2 or 3 skill points into this one, because it's not a cheap one to invest in either. It's more expensive than recharge, which is strange. So I wouldn't recommend it. I don't, because where range is concerned, I mean, sure you might get a couple of more shots in, but uh, I'm not convinced that it's actually worth it. I've done the maths before, and given the fact that instead of having to fire against a couple of really strong units, you're always fighting lots and lots of units that have it just doesn't work. Okay, trust me, it doesn't work. I'll make a video demonstrating why you shouldn't really bother with range that much. I mean, range is nice, don't get me wrong, but for this cost, no. Don't bother putting many points into that, I reckon. Just leave it alone. Now, these are the skills that you get when you buy the premium version. Let's talk about them. Banisher, 50% decreased cost of banishment. It is priceless when you're playing levels where your mode is set to maybe swarms only, where you will be constantly banishing and constantly trying to recharge and so forth. This is a very important skill, and it's not very costly. Pump it all the way up to 30. Do it. I'd say it's about as important as Forge. Demolition. Now, in this game, you can demolish towers that you create. Let me show you. There's a wall, there's a tower, there's an amplifier, shrine, there's a trap, and there's the other type of shrine. Now, you can destroy these 4 with gem bombs. They can be any type of gem, grade 1, cheapy, or an expensive one. It doesn't matter what you use, so I recommend you just use a cheap one. And that's what happens when you destroy. You get rid of them, you can maybe block off a piece of path early on with a wall, and then change it around later, destroy it, and then block off another piece of path. You could do that to juggle, I suppose. That's a tactic that's used in some other tower defense games and maps and so forth, but in this game, I think the creator has purposely tried to stop people from juggling by limiting the number of demolitions that you can do, which is fair enough, because juggling is a little bit tedious and it's a bit cheesy, actually. You cannot, however, cannot destroy shrines. So you have to remember when you place a shrine in, it's permanent. It's there forever until you finish the map. So be careful with that. And having said that, as far as the skill is concerned, yes, it'll give you 10 more demolitions. I can't remember how many demolitions you get initially in the game when this skill level is off like that. I think it's something like, off the top of my head, it might be about 3 or 5 or 6 or something like that. It's a very small, limited number. This just increases the number you can do, which gives you a little bit more malleability for the levels where there's a lot of space and you need to make a lot of um, walls and so forth to make a maze and whatnot, and you need to change it around a bit. Can be useful, but honestly, I think if you're doing a lot of demolitions, then you're probably not playing the game very efficiently. You might want to rethink your tactics. So it's not that important unless you really, if your style of play needs it. You can generally ignore this one. It's pretty expensive as far as skill points go, and it only has one use and it's very rarely used. So as far as affecting the game consistently goes, it's not very efficient. I wouldn't really bother with this until you've got too many points that you don't know what to do with. Violent explosions, gem bombs. Now, gem bombs were much more important to be used back in the original Gemcraft game, and I think in Gemcraft Chapter 0 you use gem bombs a little bit, but to be honest, I don't really use gem bombs for anything other than to anger monster waves, so I didn't really find this useful. You might find this useful if it's your style of play. I don't really see much of an advantage to it. It doesn't seem very expensive to pump this skill up a bit, but 15% damage, 50% higher target limit for gem bombs. In other words, more monsters you can hit, but 15%. I mean, come on, unless you get into the really high grade gems that you're using for gem bombs, you're not really going to see much of a difference. Maybe 1 or 2 more, depending on the grade. Monsters affected. Gem Anvil returns 15% more mana for destroyed gems. That does affect me because I do destroy gems a little bit. That might help me a little bit more in conjunction with my wild gem. I destroy that gem at the start, so hey, 15% more mana. I can live with that. 15% more monsters summoned by gems dropped on wavestones. That can help, especially if you're just looking for numbers, trying to get many kills, lots of mana early on. That can help, but again, 15%, I'm sorry, this number is not high enough to make it seem worthwhile in my mind. I'm not convinced. But you might find it more useful than me. So that will depend on person to person. I can't really recommend. For my style of play, personally, I don't know, maybe a couple of points early on, and then just leave it there until I've got enough saturated amount of skill points to just go nuts with it. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, moving on. Magnify. Raises the power ratio of amplifiers by 30%. Very simple, straightforward advice for you here. If you use amplifiers, you must pump skill points into this. Goes up 30 levels, the most expensive and the highest level is 4 points, so it doesn't cost many points to get it going. By all means, pump in a lot of points into this one. Magnify if you use amplifiers regularly, and if you use maybe 2 or more amplifiers regularly per match. If you use just one amplifier occasionally, it's not really going to be worth your skill points. You're better off pumping your skill points in somewhere else. But if you do, definitely remember this. Triple Gem Mastery. It's exactly the same as Double Gem Mastery, and to be honest, as you get later into the levels and so forth, you'll be finding yourself making triple gems quite a bit, so that does become a lot handier, a lot more handy a lot later on. But initially, I would just ignore that, because, yeah, unless you're on an epic field, you have to actually purchase the rights to use another color gem, and that's a very costly thing to do if you're a very low skill level wizard and you haven't got much in the way of starting mana and so forth. So yeah, recommended for mid to late game. Let's see, multiplied damage, range, firing speed. Yeah, it's exactly the same. Powerful shrines. Yeah. Look, if you use shrines a lot, by all means use it. I don't really use shrines much other than to get my battle amulets per level. I think there's a few for shrines, by building shrines and by killing a number of monsters with shrines. I honestly I don't really find this uh, much use. This is a low priority skill in my opinion. This one. Deadly traps. Trap damage modifier increased by 30%. Trap specials modifier increased by 30%. This is a skill that is not important at all until very late in your journeys where you are finally able to start doing mana farms. Mana farms cost a lot of um, quite a lot of mana to start, and to be honest, they don't produce a lot of mana until you start to really seriously pump a lot of gems and a lot of mana into buying gems and stuff and so forth. Like mana farms they consist of mana gain the orange gem and the lime colored gem. The lime colored gem allows the orange gem to basically hit more targets per shot, and yeah, you get a lot of mana gain. Once you start doing that, by all means, pump this right up to 15. It costs bugger all. It's honestly, it's nothing. Pump it all the way up. Start making your mana farms, and you will be flying in no time. You'll have more mana than you know what to do with. So, important but only late in the game. And I will show you what a mana farm is and how it works and so forth and why it's so expensive to make in another video. So, keep an eye out for that. Readiness, 80% faster deployment in towers and traps. This is a joke, to be honest. It does cost bugger all, but it's a bit of a joke. It's basically, let's see, I'll make a tower, I'll put my wild gem in there, see how it's grayed out, and when I start up, there we go, it looks like a clock ticking, and then now it's finally ready. Basically, that's all that is about. Making that delay shorter. I'm not convinced that's really important. I mean, if that's important to you, then I'd recommend you change your tactics. This is a very low priority skill as well. It's about as high priority as powerful shrines, I'd say, or demolition. It's honestly, it's worth bugger all. And unfortunately, so is this. I thought this was going to be pretty good. Now, this skill, for every 25 battle amulets you earn in the labyrinth, initial mana and mana pool size is increased by 1. Now, that's a lot of battle amulets. Now, I've played this game. I've done well over 200. No, well over probably about 500 matches now. Close to 500 matches. And for at least half of them, I've gained almost every single battle amulet for every battle that I do. And yet, how many battle amulets have I got? 5,505. So, with that skill pumped all the way up to the maximum, I gotta say, this skill is really disappointing actually. For every 5 battle amulets, now I've pumped in a reasonable amount of skill points. It's not exactly cheap. Starts off with 3, ends in 5 per level. 20 levels worth. For every 5 battle amulets you earn in the labyrinth, initial mana and mana pool size is increased by 1. So basically, through all of my battle amulets and all my efforts, my initial mana and my mana pool size is increased by 1001 at the start. So without that skill at all, I would have 13,840 as my initial mana, 55,000 and 60 mana as my maximum. I'm sorry, that's a lot of effort and very little return. I am not convinced that it's worth much. So again, an extremely low priority one, especially considering just to get it started cost 3 points of skill levels. Um, sorry, 3 skill points per level. Nah, not convinced. Very low priority. It's really strange actually. Out of After purchasing the game, with the skill levels that or the skills that you can start pumping into, it, um, I don't know. There's a couple of them that are important. This is very important. This is relatively important. This is important later in the game. This one can be important, I suppose, if you're really counting numbers for gem bombs on wavestones and so forth. Anvil. This is important for mana farms, but again, that's late game. There's about 4 or 5 skills here, which I think are pretty. Ugh. I just nah. I wouldn't miss them if they weren't there. Put it that way. So, really, when you pay your $6, $7 or whatever it is for the game, you're not buying it for those. You're buying it for these, essentially. You're buying for the rights to be able to do more than just this. You're buying the rights to do that, essentially, and endurance. Endurance is an important one. It just makes the game so much different. Anyways, that's the skills talked about. In the next video, I am going to talk about gems, what they do, strategies on how to use them effectively, and so forth, the types that are available. I'm also going to show you a mana farm and why it's so expensive, and I'm also going to talk about tombs and so forth, just different aspects of the game. Oh, and mana shards. Need to talk to you about mana shards because they are new in this game, and if you have no idea what they are, then they could be a bit confusing. So I'll touch over all those topics in the next video. Thank you for watching. Catch you later.